Hi, I think it would be good to choose Thuli Madonsela. Reason being that from a point of view, media's point of view, she is actually very good at what she does, and she's actually only been the one to actually tackle unusual situations. So once again, like the previous viewer said, Thuli Madonsela is the perfect one.
All right, so we asked you to send us voice notes. Who do you think should be the next prosecution's boss? What now? Who can restore trust in this body? The confirmation application, remember, was brought forward by Freedom Under Law, Corruption Watch, and the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution, or CASAC. The Executive Secretary of CASAC, Lawson Naidoo, joins us now from Cape Town. With me in studio here in Auckland Park is Tiso Black Star Senior Legal Journalist Karyn Maughn. Welcome to you both. Let me start with you, Karyn, and please stand by with us. Lawson, Karyn, who is in charge of the NPA right now?
Well, at this point, given that the appointment of Shaun Abrahams was ruled invalid, and the court also said it would not be appropriate for Mxolisi Nxasana to be reinstated, we're essentially in a bit of a leaderless void. It's going to be very important for the president to appoint either an acting national director of public prosecutions out of the 3 available national deputy directors of prosecution that are available, because that's what the NPA Act states, or he may well decide that he wants to appoint a permanent person and put forward that name. But at this point, no one is actually in charge of the NPA.
All right, so Lawson Naidoo, everybody was caught up in this. No one left unscathed from this judgment. Let's start with Nxasana, because you had a different take. The other parties to this matter saying that he should be reappointed. CASAC said no. So just explain what you were saying about him having his price.
Well, the basic difference of opinion was that CASAC was of the view that given Mr. Nxasana's role in agreeing to that unlawful settlement, that he should not be allowed to benefit from it and retain his office. That he knew that he should have known that that agreement that he reached with former President Zuma was unlawful, was not provided for in the legislation, and he should not have acceded to it. And we felt that for those reasons, his integrity was called into question sufficiently not to justify his return to office as national director. And we therefore argued before the court and were successful in saying that the court should declare a vacancy in the office of the NDPP, which has now been done. Having said that, I do want to say that I think it was fair and just that the Constitutional Court today overturned the personal cost order that the High Court ordered against Mr. Nxasana in the High Court matter. We felt that that was unjustifiably punitive, and we're very pleased that that cost order was overturned today.
He still has to pay back 10 million rand. He doesn't get his job back. Do you have sympathy?
Of course we have sympathy with him, and he was, as he said just now, he was placed under enormous pressure. He was simply trying to do his job. He was resisting an inordinate amount of pressure that came from within the NPA, from people like Advocate Jiba and Mrebi, and he sought to try and enforce the constitutional mandate that he had. Unfortunately, he was pushed into such a corner that he ultimately acquiesced in an unlawful agreement. And regrettably, he must pay the price for that.
The judges, Karyn, are saying that ordering Nxasana to return would prolong instability at the prosecution's authority. Is there merit to that?
Well, essentially what they were saying is, I think what Lawson raised as well, is that because he'd acceded to this illegal deal, which violated the NPA Act, violated the Constitution, there was a distinct likelihood that he could possibly face another inquiry into his fitness to hold office. Remember, at the time in which this illegal deal was done, he was actually facing an inquiry, and there was this parallel process by former President Jacob Zuma then to negotiate with him and to offer him initially 10 million rand, and then this amazing revelation about saying, well, I'll just leave the amount blank, you can fill it in, which the court ultimately said was demonstrative of the fact that the former president was simply desperate to make Mxolisi Nxasana go away. But the court court effectively saying because of that, because of those issues, that inquiry that was never actually proceeded with, and because of agreeing to this illegal deal, there was a potential for him to face another inquiry into his fitness, and that would prolong the instability at the NPA. And the court, as the High Court did, really reflecting on the fact that since at least 2007, with the removal of Vusi Pikoli, the NPA had been in sort of slow and constant state of crisis, lurching from one disaster to another, never having an NDPP that fulfilled his or her full term, and that this was really about the court in some respect, particularly in terms of those amendments to the NPA Act, trying to create an environment for an independent NDPP to take the position and to be able to do his or her job without fear of interference.
Then Shaun Abrahams moves into the picture, staying with Karyn. So he becomes a beneficiary of an abuse of power by the former president, which means he's not necessarily done anything wrong.
Well, it was very interesting because in the High Court matter, the North Gauteng High Court, which was the original genesis of this judgment, had a lot to say about Shaun Abrahams. They were unhappy about the way he treated this litigation involving President Zuma, former President Zuma. They said that he'd taken the side of Zuma. They were very unhappy with the way that he'd handled the matter with Nonkobo Jiba, withdrawn those perjury and fraud case against her. And they raised a lot of alarm bells, particularly about how he saw this legal action as essentially being driven by, calling CASAC and other entities names and having quite a sarcastic response to it. So there was a whole host of issues raised by the Pretoria High Court. The Constitutional Court has not gone there. They've simply said it is a consequence of the fact that this was an illegal thing that President Zuma did. He did it in an apparent, bid to further his own self-interest. And as a consequence of that, it is simply untenable for Shaun Abrahams to continue in the position. And that's a consequence of that illegality. So I think the court wanted to avoid making adverse comments about Shaun Abrahams. They just simply said he was part of this. He, in many respects, like Mxolisi Nxasana, in some respects, is collateral damage to this ruling.
So Lawson, CASAC's response to that?
Well, as Karyn said, the issue of the conduct of Mr. Abrahams was never really at issue in this matter. This was about the independence of the National Prosecuting Authority being able to bring stability back to this important institution. In the High Court matter, there was plenty of argument around Mr. Abrahams' role in the spy tapes case and the Jiba case and so on. And that's why the High Court commented on that. The Constitutional Court was not required to go there in any way. They were able to reach their decision on the basis of the judgment of the High Court and on their own legal reasoning as to why he should not be returned to office. And they made the point that none of the parties overtly questioned Mr. Abrahams' fitness to hold office, because we know that in order to do so, one would need to institute a formal inquiry, and that was not the purpose of this litigation.
I presume you don't support him to be the next prosecution's head.
Well, I think for the reasons outlined in the way that he's handled himself in some very high-profile political cases, that he's shown that he's not really up to the standard of a prosecutor that operates without fear and favor. He's chosen sides in some fairly major cases, not least being the spy tapes case, where he was castigated by the courts for siding with former President Zuma in the way that he did, relenting at the last moment, only when the president relented. So I think that shows that he doesn't really have the kind of a character and strength of character that we need in the National Director of Public Prosecutions, particularly as we get into the era now of investigating allegations of state capture and corruption, and we're going to need somebody at the helm of the NPA who's going to prosecute whomever there is evidence against, and not to curry political favor with certain politicians or certain factions of political parties.
But Karyn, if there's no firm legal adverse finding against him, he seems like a victim here. Is there any possibility that Shaun Abrahams will seek recourse?
I think, given that the Constitutional Court is the apex court, and there has been this kind of profound pronouncement that his appointment was improper, I think he'll have to accept that. The issue now is, of course, that President Cyril Ramaphosa has to find a person to fulfill either in an acting capacity or a permanent role his position. And the president, has done nothing to defend Shaun Abrahams. He withdrew the appeal that was lodged by former President Jacob Zuma to the North Gauteng High Court judgment. He did not seek to get involved in this litigation. And when he was asked in Parliament in June this year about Shaun Abrahams' continued leadership and whether he had faith in it, he made it very clear that he was essentially waiting for the pronouncement of the Constitutional Court on this issue. And I think he would be very wary of potentially going back to reappoint or put Shaun Abrahams in that position, because it could be seen as essentially discounting what the court has said about, the whole dynamics of the situation. Shaun Abrahams, in many respects, yes, he has not been found unfit to hold office. But I get the rhetoric, given his links to Nonkobo Jiba and the kind of political ramifications of that, given that Ramaphosa has made it so clear that he wants a new dawn for the NPA, I think it's much more likely that we will see a completely different person appointed to this position, and that the president will take time and effort to try and really come up with someone who's appropriate to lead the organization.
So I'd like to ask you both about possibilities, but first, very quickly, there was a clear finding with the former president. So another black mark, Karyn, for former President Jacob Zuma.
Well, I don't know what Lawson thinks. I would love to know his opinion, but I consider this literally one of the strongest rulings that's been made against President Jacob Zuma. We saw him, former President Jacob Zuma, we saw him being found to have violated the Constitution in terms of his handling of the Nkandla matter. We saw him, with the spy tapes matter, that the decision not to prosecute him was irrational. But this is really one of the most profound comments that has been made against him, that he abused his power to essentially offer unlimited amounts, seemingly unlimited amounts of money.
Of taxpayers' money
to make this person go away. Now remember that Mxolisi Nxasana's affidavit was admitted into evidence in this case, and in the Constitutional Court matter. And in that affidavit, he makes it very clear that the president's paranoia and fear that he would be prosecuted by Mxolisi Nxasana was essentially what drove this whole debacle. So 17.3 million rand of taxpayers' money, untold amounts of litigation later. I mean, this court case cost millions of rands, all about protecting former President Jacob Zuma from the prospect of a completely appropriate and legitimate prosecution. And that is a damning indictment against the former president.
Do you agree, Lawson, one of the strongest judgments against the former president?
Indeed, I agree. I think the Justice Madlanga chose his words very carefully, and they were strong words indeed about the abuse of power. And as we know, the former President Zuma abused public funds and abused state institutions in order to protect his personal interests, which is the very reason why the High Court in Pretoria in December said that for as long as he was president, he should not be choosing the National Director of Public Prosecutions because of that very conflict of interest that he placed himself in. And I think today's judgment and the words used in the court today were a vindication of that part of the High Court decision, which is now moot because Jacob Zuma is no longer president, but really affirming the decision reached at by the High Court that at that time they said that Deputy President Ramaphosa should have made the appointment. Now that matter is moot, and Cyril Ramaphosa as president will make that appointment. And we certainly hope that that going forward, as you said, a new national director is appointed. And I think the other important thing from today is that the court kept stressing the issue of the stability of the National Prosecuting Authority, and in seeking to find a just and equitable remedy to the set of circumstances that faced them, they prioritized remedies that would assist in stabilizing the NPA, and I think the court must be commended for taking that into account and recognizing the importance that that institution plays in the criminal justice system in South Africa.
Well, my next question then to you, Lawson, what next, given the importance of this specific role, given all the controversy we've seen, who should be appointed?
Well, I think, President Ramaphosa has got to appoint someone who's robustly independent, who's going to show the strength of character to withstand pressure, to withstand the kind of pressure that Mr. Nxasana was unable to withstand, having received it from former President Zuma. Someone who's going to be able to stand up to President Ramaphosa himself and other members of his cabinet and other senior politicians in taking decisions. And he's going to have to find that person and provide that person with the institutional independence so that that person is very difficult to get at, is supported by a strong team within the NPA that work together in order to prosecute crimes against the state in South Africa. And I think, we certainly hope that the president has already applied his mind to this matter and, perhaps as a shortlist, if not made up his mind. But obviously in the future, as said earlier in the clips, I think there needs to be a much more open, transparent and inclusive process of selecting the NDPP. This is not a matter that should be left merely in the hands of the president.
All right, thank you very much. We have to leave it there. Thank you so much, the Executive Secretary of CASAC, Lawson Naidoo, part of that case, and we'll continue to follow your reports, your incisive reports. Thank you very much. Karyn Maughn, Tiso Black Star journalist. And if you want to listen to this interview and many more, you can go to sabcnews.com, Facebook, Twitter, or simply send us your comments. We asked for them earlier and asking who you think could take up the post of Prosecutions boss, do it well in South Africa, given all the controversy. Let's take a listen.